August 17th, 1859. Savannah's largest slave auction house fell silent when lot number 43 stepped onto the platform. 27 bidders had their paddles ready that sweltering afternoon, but within minutes, only one hand remained in the air. The woman standing in chains was young, healthy, and experienced in valuable domestic skills. Her starting price was deliberately set low. Yet something made every plantation owner in that room lower their eyes and step back. Something they knew. Something they whispered about in the corridors, but never spoke aloud. One man, newly arrived from Charleston, didn't hear those whispers. He paid $12 for a woman worth $200. Within 6 months, he would understand why silence had filled that auction house, and by then, it would be far too late to save himself. Before we continue with the story of what happened in Chatham County that year, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one, pulled from the darkest corners of American history, are what we bring you every week. And leave a comment telling us what state or city you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these tales of terror travel. Now, let me tell you about the purchase that changed everything. The auction house on Broughton Street had seen thousands of transactions since its establishment in 1842, but the events of that August afternoon would be remembered differently than any other sale. The air inside the building was thick with unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and fear that no amount of whitewash could cover. But there was something else that day. Something the regular attendees noticed immediately. A tension that made even hardened slave traders shift uncomfortably in their seats. Savannah in 1859 stood as one of the South's most prosperous cities, its wealth built entirely on cotton and forced labor. The city's port handled millions of pounds of the white crop each year, and the plantations surrounding it competed viciously for the most productive workers. Chatham County's soil was rich, its growing season long, and its plantation owners ruthless in their pursuit of profit. Thomas Cornelius Pruitt arrived in Savannah 3 weeks before that fateful auction. At 34 years old, he represented new Southern money, the kind that made old families uncomfortable. His father had made a fortune in Charleston through cotton speculation and died suddenly, leaving Thomas with more wealth than experience. Thomas had purchased the old Waverly plantation site unseen, eager to prove himself among Georgia's planting elite. The property came cheap, the previous owner having died without heirs, and Thomas saw it as his opportunity to build a legacy. The Waverly estate stretched across 800 acres of prime cotton land along the Vernon River. The main house displayed columned grandeur despite needing repairs. 42 enslaved people came with the property, but Thomas's overseer, a lean man named Hutchins, advised he would need at least 60 to work the land properly for the coming season. Hence his presence at the Broughton Street auction house that August morning, cash in hand and determination in his eyes. The auction began at 10 o'clock. Thomas bid successfully on 3 young men and an experienced cook, spending nearly $5,000 by noon. During the lunch break, he overheard a conversation between 2 planters he recognized from a dinner party the previous week. "You staying for the afternoon session?" one asked. "No reason to. Already got what I came for. Besides, I know what's coming. Heard they're finally selling her. About time. Been sitting in the holding pens for 3 weeks. Nobody wants to buy. Still can't believe what happened at the Pemberton place. 3 men dead inside of 2 months. 4, if you count old Pemberton himself. Though Dr. Reeves said that was his heart. Mighty convenient timing." Thomas stepped back before they could notice him. His curiosity piqued. When the auction resumed at 1 o'clock, several morning bidders had not returned. The first 3 afternoon lots sold quickly, then came lot 43. The woman who stepped onto the platform moved with dignity that seemed impossible given her circumstances. She appeared to be in her early 30s, skin the color of polished walnut, features sharp and defined. But it was her eyes that struck Thomas most. Dark, almost black, possessing a quality of stillness that belonged to someone who had stopped hoping and found a different kind of strength in that hopelessness. Lot 43, the auctioneer announced without enthusiasm. Female, approximately 32 years of age, name of Celia. Experienced in household duties, particularly cooking and medical assistance. Has served as midwife and herb doctor. Literate in English. No known physical defects. Starting bid of $10. Thomas waited for raised paddles. Instead, silence. $10 was insultingly low for a woman with medical skills. Midwives were valuable, often earning owners significant income by attending births throughout the county. $10. The auctioneer repeated. Do I hear $10? The silence stretched. Men deliberately looked away, studying floors, ceilings, their own hands, anything but the woman on the platform. Thomas raised his paddle. $10 to the gentleman in the blue coat, the auctioneer said quickly, relief evident. Do I hear 12? Nothing. The room remained frozen. Going once at $10, going twice. Sold for $10 to the gentleman in blue. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The woman, Celia, turned her gaze toward Thomas for the first time. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of recognition or assessment. Then, she was led away. After the auction, Thomas approached the office to complete his purchases. When he inquired about Celia's history, the clerk's pen paused briefly before continuing. Came from the Pemberton estate. Property was liquidated after Mr. Pemberton's death 3 months ago. And her skills are accurately listed? That's what the estate inventory stated. Seems unusual that no one else bid. The clerk looked up briefly. Not my place to question what buyers do or don't do, sir. Your total comes to $6,710. The journey to Waverley took just over an hour along the river road. As they approached, the main house came into view. A 2-story structure with 6 columns across the front portico, white paint fading in places. Beyond lay the quarters, 2 long buildings, and further still the cotton fields stretching toward the tree line in neat rows. When they arrived, Hutchins organized the new arrivals. The men would join field gangs. The cook would take over the main house kitchen. But when it came to Celia, Hutchins seemed uncertain. Where do you want this one, Mr. Pruitt? Thomas considered. She has medical training. We'll use her as midwife. Have her set up in the old overseer's cabin near the quarters. Hutchins nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Though we already have old patients who tends to such things. Then Celia can assist her. 2 pairs of hands are better than 1. Thomas was about to question Hutchins's reluctance when a servant approached, informing him that Josiah Crenshaw had arrived to pay respects to the new owner. Thomas recognized the name from the conversation outside the auction house. Crenshaw waited on the front portico, a heavy-set man in his late 50s dressed in casual elegance. After exchanging pleasantries over bourbon, Crenshaw shifted the conversation. I noticed you made some purchases today. Good selections. Though I sense you didn't hear all the talk about one particular acquisition. Thomas met his gaze. You're referring to Celia. For $10. Did you wonder why no one else bid? The thought crossed my mind. Crenshaw set his glass down carefully. That woman came from the Pemberton estate. Dr. Harold Pemberton died 3 months ago. Healthy until he wasn't. His nephew inherited and immediately sold everything, couldn't get away fast enough. He paused. Pemberton's death wouldn't have raised eyebrows by itself. But it was what came before. And what came before? His overseer, a man named Kelly, dead from brain fever after 2 weeks of raving. Before that, Pemberton's driver Marcus, found dead in the stables with a broken neck. They said kicked by a horse, but Marcus knew horses better than anyone. And before that, Pemberton's physician, Dr. Simon Vance, dead from apparent influenza complications. Thomas absorbed this. You're suggesting these deaths are connected? 4 men associated with the Pemberton household died within 2 months, and the only common thread was that woman. She prepared medicines, tonics, teas, had access to the main house, the kitchen, the sick rooms. Crenshaw leaned forward. And she had reason. What reason? About 6 months ago, Celia's daughter took ill. Pneumonia, they thought. Dr. Vance attended her. The girl died 3 days later. Celia claimed the doctor was drunk, gave wrong treatment, killed her daughter through negligence. She made loud accusations. Pemberton had her whipped and confined. Crenshaw finished his bourbon. 2 weeks later, Dr. Vance was dead, then Marcus, then Kelly, then Pemberton. That could be coincidence. Could be. But that woman has knowledge of herbs and plants that goes deeper than most. She knows what cures and what kills, and she's got nothing left to lose. He stood to leave. I came as a courtesy, Mr. Pruitt. What you do with the information is your business. But if I were you, I would sell that woman quickly, or put her in the fields where she can't access anyone's food or drink. That evening, Thomas visited the overseer's cabin where Celia had been housed. She sat on the rough bed, hands unbound, posture straight despite the day's ordeal. She stood when she saw him, but her eyes met his directly. "You're Celia," Thomas said. "Yes, master. I'm told you have skills as a midwife and herbalist. Where did you learn?" "My mother was midwife before me. She learned from her mother. I learned from watching, then doing. And I can read, so I studied books when I could find them." Her candor surprised him. "I'm also told you came from the Pemberton estate. There were several deaths there. People die, master. That's the one certain thing in this world." "Indeed, but the timing caused some talk. White folks always talk, especially when they don't understand something." "And what didn't they understand?" Celia said nothing for a long moment. Then, "They didn't understand that debts come due. One way or another, everything balances in the end." The statement could have been philosophical or threatening. Thomas decided to be direct. "Did you kill them?" She smiled slightly without warmth. "Can't kill a man with words, master, or with prayers, or with hoping real hard that justice finds them. If they died, it was divine providence or their own sins catching up. I'm just a slave. Don't have the power to do anything but what I'm told. You'll work as midwife here, tend to the sick, deliver babies, prepare medicines as needed under old patients' supervision." "Yes, master. And Celia, whatever happened at Pemberton's place, it stays there. Here at Waverley we start fresh. Understood?" "Yes, master. Understood perfectly." That night, Thomas lay in bed thinking about Celia's daughter, dead at 16 from pneumonia or a doctor's negligence. He thought about a mother's grief and what it might drive someone to do. He thought about herbs and plants, how the same knowledge that eased pain could cause it. Most of all, he thought about 4 dead men and 1 woman with nothing left to lose. The harvest began in late September. Dark clouds had been building over the Atlantic for days. A late-season hurricane was coming. If the cotton wasn't picked before the storm hit, an entire year's profit could be destroyed. Thomas drove his workers hard, as all planters did during harvest. They rose before dawn and worked until darkness made it impossible to continue. Celia was not in the fields. Thomas had assigned her to work alongside old patients. Within a week, even Hutchins reported they had reached an understanding. Old patient says the new woman knows her business. Knows plants and remedies patients never heard of, asked if she could start a proper herb garden. Thomas approved it, reasoning Celia would be under patients' supervision. The garden began as a small plot behind the quarters, comfrey for wounds, feverfew for headaches, willow bark for pain, chamomile for stomach ailments. Each plant was labeled with neat handwriting, and Celia kept a journal documenting everything. October brought the hurricane everyone expected. It struck on the 12th. Massive winds that bent trees nearly horizontal and rain so thick visibility was impossible. The storm lasted 18 hours. When it passed, about 20% of the cotton had been destroyed and part of the quarter's roof torn away. Within 2 days of the hurricane, people began falling ill. It started with children. Fever, chills, violent coughing. Then it spread to adults. Within a week, 23 people were sick, including 3 house servants and Hutchins' wife. Thomas sent to Savannah for a doctor. The young physician who arrived looked overwhelmed immediately. He prescribed rest, fluids, and regular doses of calomel. Keep them warm and dry. The fever should break in a week or so. After the doctor left, Thomas found Celia in the quarters, moving from patient to patient with patients trailing behind. She had organized them efficiently, checking temperatures, listening to breathing, examining with practiced assessment. The doctor prescribed calomel. Thomas told her. Celia didn't look up. Calomel makes it worse, weakens them more than the fever does. It's what doctors use. Doctors kill more people than they save. You want these people to live so they can keep working? Let me treat them my way. Thomas should have been offended by her tone. Instead, he asked, "What would you do differently?" "No calomel. Willow bark tea for fever. Honey and garlic for cough. Elderberry to strengthen them. Keep them hydrated with boiled water, not raw river water. And most important, keep the sickest ones separate. This illness spreads through the air. Group them too close and you'll lose everyone." It went against conventional wisdom, which held that diseases arose from bad air rather than spreading person to person. But Thomas had noticed diseases did seem to cluster in patterns. "Do it your way," he said, "but if people start dying, it becomes your responsibility." "People dying is always someone's responsibility, Master. The question is whose?" She organized the sick into 3 groups by severity, preparing teas and tonics carefully. Within 3 days, fever began breaking in the first patients. Within a week, all but 2 had recovered, both elderly, already weakened. Under conventional treatment, Thomas suspected the death toll would have been far higher. Word spread quickly. By early November, Thomas received visits from neighboring planters wanting to borrow Celia's services. He agreed, partly for neighborly relations and partly because the fees brought additional income. Celia was sent to the Mansfield Plantation for yellow fever, to the Rutledge place for a difficult childbirth, to a farm near the Ogeechee River for a snake bite. In each case, she succeeded where others would have failed. Her reputation grew. Celia could heal what others couldn't, but reputation is dangerous, especially for someone in Celia's position. People began remembering the Pemberton estate. They wondered if someone who knew so much about healing might also know about the opposite. Thomas heard these whispers but dismissed them. Celia had been professional and effective since arriving. She had saved his workers and earned him money. Whatever had happened at Pemberton's was past. December brought unusual cold, frost covering fields in the mornings. The cotton harvest had been completed despite hurricane damage, and Thomas had sold his crop for a respectable price. He began to relax, feeling he had navigated his first year without major disaster. That was when the first sign appeared. Hutchins came to the main house one Tuesday morning, face pale and hands shaking. "Mr. Pruitt, you need to come to the quarters, now." A crowd had gathered near the quarters' north end. They parted when Thomas approached, revealing a symbol painted on the wall in what appeared to be blood, or dark red clay. The symbol was complex. A circle with lines radiating outward and smaller circles at specific points. In the center was a handprint, adult-sized fingers spread wide. "What is this?" Thomas demanded. An older man named Daniel stepped forward. "It's a warning sign, Master. Old magic, African magic from before any of us were born. My grandmother knew of such things, said they were dangerous, that they called on powers that didn't forget and didn't forgive." "Who did this?" Silence. Then Daniel said carefully, "Don't know, Master, but signs like that usually mean someone's working roots, calling on the old ways. And when someone works roots, bad things follow." Thomas ordered the symbol washed away and announced severe punishment for anyone caught painting such things. But the damage was done. Fear had entered Waverley. 3 days later, Hutchins's prize hunting dog was found dead near the well, body stiff and mouth foaming with dried saliva. The dog had been healthy that morning. "Poison," Hutchins said flatly. "Something fast-acting." A week before Christmas, a field worker named Samuel fell ill. He complained of stomach pains that grew progressively worse. By evening he was vomiting violently, body convulsing. Celia was summoned, but when she examined him, her expression grew grave. "This isn't natural illness, he's been poisoned." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Poisoned? How?" "Can't say without knowing what he ate or drank, but the symptoms are consistent with several plant toxins." She looked at Thomas. "The question isn't what poisoned him. The question is who gave it to him." Samuel died 3 hours later in seizures. It was a horrible death, and everyone witnessed some part of it. The fear that had been spreading now exploded into near panic. Thomas ordered an investigation, questioning everyone near Samuel that day. The results were frustratingly inconclusive. Samuel had eaten from the communal pot, drunk from the well. He had no known enemies. There was no apparent reason for anyone to want him dead. Unless, Thomas thought with growing dread, Samuel wasn't the intended target. Unless someone was simply practicing, testing methods, preparing for something larger. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to every creak, wondering what was happening on his plantation. Someone had knowledge of poisons. Someone was using it. And despite his earlier confidence, Thomas found himself thinking again about the Pemberton estate and those 4 dead men. Christmas at Waverley was subdued. Thomas had planned to give the enslaved workers 3 days off with extra rations, but Samuel's death had cast a pall over everything. People accepted their gifts with muted thanks, avoiding eye contact, eager to return to the quarters where they felt safer in numbers. On Christmas evening, Thomas heard a commotion from the quarters. He grabbed his pistol and ran outside into the cold December night. A crowd had gathered near the well, faces illuminated by torches. At the center, 2 men restrained a young woman named Ruth. She was fighting them, screaming words that didn't quite make sense, eyes wide and unfocused. "What's happening?" Thomas demanded. Hutchins pushed through the crowd. "She tried to throw herself down the well, sir. Daniel and Joseph caught her just in time." Ruth was perhaps 19, a house servant who worked in the laundry. Thomas had never known her to cause trouble. "Ruth, what were you doing?" She stopped struggling and turned toward him. In torchlight, her face looked gaunt, almost skeletal. "They're coming for me. I can hear them. They're in my head, telling me what I did, showing me what's going to happen. I can't make them stop. The only way to make them stop is to..." She lunged toward the well again, but the men holding her were ready. "She's been like this for hours," a house servant said. "Started just after sunset, talking about voices and shadows and debts coming due." Debts coming due. The same phrase Celia had used months ago. Thomas felt cold that had nothing to do with December temperature. Get her inside, tie her down if necessary, and someone fetch Celia. But Celia was already there, standing at the crowd's edge, so still Thomas hadn't noticed. She moved forward now, and the crowd parted for her. "Let me see her," Celia said. Ruth's eyes focused on Celia, and something like recognition crossed her face. You know. You understand. Tell them. Tell them what I did." "Hush now," Celia said, her voice gentle in a way Thomas had never heard. "No need to tell anyone anything. What's done is done, and what's coming will come regardless. I didn't mean for him to die," Ruth sobbed. "I was just so angry. He had no right to touch me like that. I just wanted him to hurt like he made me hurt. I didn't know the mushrooms would kill him. I swear I didn't know." The crowd went silent. Thomas felt as if the ground had shifted. "Ruth, are you saying you poisoned Samuel?" But Ruth wasn't looking at Thomas. Her eyes were fixed on Celia, pleading and terrified. "Make it stop, please. The voices, the shadows. Make them stop." Celia touched Ruth's forehead with 2 fingers, a gesture that seemed almost ritualistic. "Can't stop what you started, child. You opened a door you didn't know was there, and now you have to walk through it. All I can do is ease the journey." "What are you talking about?" Thomas demanded. "What door?" Celia ignored him. She produced a small bottle from her pocket, uncorked it, and held it to Ruth's lips. "Drink this. It'll calm the voices, quiet the shadows. You'll sleep, and when you wake, you'll be at peace." Ruth drank obediently. Within minutes, her struggling ceased. Her eyes closed. Her breathing became slow and regular. The men carried her to an empty cabin to be watched, and the crowd dispersed slowly, whispering. Thomas grabbed Celia's arm before she could leave. "What did you give her?" "Valerian root, mostly. Chamomile, poppy extract, things to help her sleep. She confessed to murder. She confessed to being foolish. Girl had relations with Samuel she didn't want. Got some mushrooms she thought would make him sick, teach him a lesson. Didn't realize the ones she picked were deadly. Easy to mistake if you don't know what you're looking for. Celia pulled her arm free. Now she's eaten up with guilt, seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices that don't exist. Mind can do terrible things when it's breaking under the weight of what it's done. You seem to know a great deal about minds breaking. Celia met his gaze steadily. I know about guilt, Master. Know about what it does to people, how it twists them up inside until they can't tell what's real and what's not. I know about debts, and how they come due in ways people don't expect. She walked away, leaving Thomas with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that he was in far deeper water than he had realized. Ruth died 2 days later, still sleeping. She simply stopped breathing during the night, peacefully by all accounts. Celia examined her and declared it heart failure brought on by extreme distress. The death was ruled natural, though several workers whispered that Ruth had been allowed to die, that Celia's medicine had been something other than valerian. Thomas didn't know what to believe. Ruth had confessed to Samuel's murder, which should have brought clarity, but instead it had only deepened the mystery. How had an ignorant girl known which mushrooms to use? Where had she learned about plant toxins? The answer came slowly, as Thomas observed Celia more carefully. She wasn't just a healer. She was something older and more complex, a keeper of knowledge that predated American slavery, carried across the ocean in the memories of stolen people. She knew herbs not just from books, but from generations of accumulated wisdom passed mother to daughter in secret. And she was teaching others. Thomas began to notice patterns. Women who had been sick would spend time with Celia and emerge different, more confident, more knowing. Ruth had been one of those women. January brought bitter cold and an ice storm that coated everything in crystal. The plantation operations slowed to a crawl. During this forced confinement, Thomas finally took action he should have taken months earlier. He broke into Celia's cabin while she was away treating Hutchins' wife. The cabin was meticulously organized. Dried herbs hung from ceiling beams, each bundle labeled. Bottles and jars lined shelves. A work table held mortar, pestle, measuring spoons, a small scale. But there was more. Hidden beneath the bed, Thomas found a wooden box wrapped in cloth. Inside were notebooks, pages covered with Celia's writing. Medical notes mostly, but interspersed were other entries written in a different tone. Thomas read one dated October 15th. 23 sick, 21 saved. The power to heal is the power to choose who lives. They don't understand this. They think my knowledge belongs to them, because they own my body. But knowledge can't be owned. It can only be shared or withheld. I share it with those who deserve it. I withhold it from those who don't. This is the only power I have, and I wield it carefully. Every life saved is a debt in my favor. Every death prevented is a weight on the scales. When the scales balance, justice will be served. Thomas's hands shook as he turned pages, finding more entries in the same vein. Celia was keeping a ledger of moral debts. She was deciding who was worthy of healing and who was not. Another entry, dated December 20th. The girl came to me in tears, told me what the man did to her, told me she wanted him to hurt. I gave her knowledge, as I give all who ask and deserve. Not my place to judge what she does with it. She makes her own choices, faces her own consequences. But I also gave her something else. Guilt. Planted it deep with careful words. Guilt is slower than poison, but just as deadly. It eats from the inside, destroys the spirit before the body fails. She will not live long. This is mercy, though she doesn't know it yet. Thomas closed the notebook carefully, his mind racing. Celia hadn't directly poisoned Samuel, but she had taught Ruth how, knowing what the girl intended. Then she had driven Ruth to madness and death through psychological manipulation masked as spiritual counsel. He continued searching and found, wrapped in oilcloth at the box's bottom, a single sheet of yellowed paper covered with different handwriting. My daughter, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you carry our knowledge alone. Remember what I taught you. The plants are neither good nor evil, they simply are. We choose how to use them to heal when the scales are balanced. Use them to harm when justice demands it. But always keep the ledger. Every life saved, every death allowed, every choice made must be recorded and remembered. This is our power and our burden. We are not slaves, though they call us such. We are keepers of the old knowledge, and that knowledge makes us free in ways they cannot understand or take from us. It was signed Phoebe and dated March 1838. Celia's mother, the woman who had taught her daughter not just healing, but a philosophy of selective mercy and calculated revenge. Thomas heard footsteps outside and barely had time to replace everything before Celia entered. She stopped in the doorway, eyes moving from Thomas to the bed to the hidden box. She knew. "Your wife is asking for you, master," Celia said quietly. "You should go to her now." "I don't have a wife." "Don't you? Then perhaps I misspoke. Hutchins's wife, I meant. She's asking for him, wants to see him before the end." "The end?" "The end that comes for us all, master. Some sooner, some later, but it always comes." She stepped into the cabin, closing the door. "You've been in my things. There was no point denying it." "I have." "Find what you were looking for?" "I found notebooks, records, a letter from your mother. I know what you've been doing." Celia sat on the bed, moving with weariness. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "My daughter's name was Sarah. She was 17 when she got the pneumonia. Strong girl, smart, beautiful. Could have been anything if she'd been born free." She looked at Thomas, tears in her eyes for the first time. "Dr. Vance came to see her. He was drunk. I could smell it, see it in his eyes. But he was white and educated, and I was just a slave woman, so my opinion meant nothing. He gave her calomel and ordered bloodletting. I told him it was wrong. He had me whipped for contradicting him." Her hands clenched into fists. "I watched my daughter die slowly over 3 days. Watched the calomel poison her, watched the bloodletting drain what little strength she had. She died in agony, calling for me, and I couldn't help because they had tied me up in the barn to teach me respect for white medicine." "I'm sorry," Thomas said, and meant it. "Sorry doesn't balance the scales, master. Sorry doesn't bring her back or punish the man who killed her through negligence and pride. So I did what I had to do. Dr. Vance died from what looked like influenza complications, but it wasn't influenza. It was foxglove, carefully administered over weeks in doses small enough to mimic heart problems. Marcus died because he helped hold me down for the whipping. Kelly died because he laughed while they beat me. And Pemberton died because he owned us all, because he created the system that let my daughter die while I watched helplessly." She stood, facing Thomas directly. "I'm not sorry for any of it. They deserved what they got. And if that makes me a murderer in your eyes, then so be it. But I'm also the woman who saved 21 people during the outbreak. I'm the woman who's delivered 37 babies in the past year, losing only 2. The scales balance, master. That's all I'm trying to do. Balance the scales." Thomas felt trapped between horror and something like admiration. What Celia had done was murder, cold and calculated, but she had also saved countless lives. Was she a monster or a healer? Could she be both? What about Ruth? Ruth came to me for help. I gave her knowledge. She made her own choices, but I also saw in her what I've seen in others who take a life. The guilt that comes after, the way it eats at the mind. I gave her peace, master, gave her a way out that was gentler than what she would have suffered otherwise. And Hutchins's wife? Celia's expression was neutral. Everyone dies eventually, master. The question is when and how and whether they deserve their fate. She paused. Hutchins was overseer at Pemberton's place before he came here. He supervised my whipping, held the rope himself. You didn't know that, did you? Thomas felt his stomach drop. No, he's not a bad man, just following orders. But my daughter died while I hung in that barn, and he's part of that chain. So yes, his wife is going to die. Not quickly, not obviously, but inevitably. Call it murder if you want. I call it justice. The cabin seemed darker, though the candle burned as brightly. Thomas realized he stood at a crossroads. He could report what he knew, try to have Celia arrested. But he had no proof beyond notebooks that could be interpreted as philosophical musings. And if he moved against her, Who would care for Waverley's sick? What happens now? Thomas asked. That depends on you, Master. You can try to stop me, but you won't succeed. Too many people depend on me, trust me. Move against me and you'll have a rebellion. Or you can look the other way, let the scales balance themselves and benefit from my skills. Your workers will be healthier, your profits higher. All it costs is your conscience and the lives of a few men who probably deserve what they get. And if one of those men is me? Celia tilted her head, considering. Are you guilty of anything, Master? Have you harmed someone who didn't deserve it? Killed someone through negligence or cruelty? Because if you haven't, you have nothing to fear from me. I don't punish the innocent. I only balance the scales. Thomas thought about his treatment of the people he owned. By slave-holding society's standards, he was decent, but he was still a master, still participating in a system built on human bondage. In Celia's eyes, did that make him guilty? The Waverley plantation came to you from the previous owner, Celia said softly. Did you ever wonder how he died? Thomas's mouth went dry. Natural causes. That's what I was told. He did. Heart failure from years of hard living. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't here yet. But when Pemberton's estate was liquidated, I knew where I would end up. Word travels among slaves faster than among masters. I knew Waverley was being sold to a new owner from Charleston. I knew you were young, inexperienced, ambitious. I knew you would need a skilled healer. She moved closer. So I made sure no one else bid on me. Told the other slaves what happened at Pemberton's, let them spread the word to their masters. Made myself seem dangerous, cursed, bad luck. All so that you, who didn't know any better, would buy me cheap and bring me here where I could work, heal, teach, and yes, occasionally dispense justice that white courts won't provide. You manipulated me from the beginning. I used the tools available to me, just like you use whips and chains and bills of sale to control us. We each have our weapons, Master. Mine are just less obvious. Thomas realized he was trembling, whether from anger or fear he couldn't say. I could sell you, send you south, away from everyone you know. You could try, but who would buy me now? Everyone from here to Mobile has heard the stories. And if you sold me, who would care for your sick? Who would deliver your babies? How many people would die before you found someone half as skilled? She smiled without warmth. I've made myself necessary, Master. That's the real power, not the ability to kill, but the ability to save. People forgive almost anything from someone who can save lives. The truth struck Thomas like a physical blow. Celia had made herself indispensable, and in doing so, secured a kind of freedom no legal document could provide. She couldn't be sold because she was too valuable. She couldn't be punished because too many people depended on her. So what do you want from me? Thomas asked finally. Nothing you aren't already giving me. Freedom to practice my healing, access to herbs and plants, respect for my knowledge. And one more thing. Look the other way when the scales need balancing. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Don't investigate deaths too closely. Let nature take its course, even when nature has a helping hand. You're asking me to be complicit in murder. I'm asking you to be complicit in justice. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to see it. But think on this. How many slaves die every year from the cruelties of this system? How many are whipped to death, worked to death, bred like animals, sold away from families? And how many masters ever face punishment? The law protects you, not us. So we make our own justice in the only ways available to us. Thomas had no answer. The moral foundation he had built his life on was cracking, revealing contradictions he had never wanted to examine. He was a slave owner who considered himself humane, a participant in an inherently inhumane system. Get out, he said quietly. Leave me alone. Celia nodded and moved toward the door, but before she left, she turned back. Hutchins's wife will die within a week. After that, Hutchins will be different, quieter, less efficient. He'll start drinking. The guilt of failing to save her will eat at him. You'll need a new overseer within a year. I'd suggest promoting Daniel. He's smart, fair, and the workers respect him." "How do you know all that?" "Because I've seen it before. Grief follows predictable patterns, especially when mixed with guilt. Hutchins knows deep down that he's done bad things in his life. His wife's death will make him confront that, and he won't survive the confrontation." She left then, closing the door softly. Thomas stood alone in the cabin for a long time, surrounded by jars of dried herbs and bottles of tinctures, feeling as if he had just touched something ancient and dangerous that he would never fully understand. That conversation in early January marked a turning point. Thomas didn't report what he had learned, didn't try to sell Celia or restrict her movements. He told himself he was being practical, making the best of an impossible situation. But late at night, alone in the master's chamber, he knew the truth. He was afraid. Afraid of what Celia might do if he moved against her. Afraid of losing the only competent medical care his plantation had. And perhaps most disturbing, afraid that her philosophy of balanced scales might contain more truth than he wanted to acknowledge. Hutchins's wife died on January 9th, exactly as Celia had predicted. The woman simply faded away over the course of a week, growing weaker each day until her breathing stopped one cold morning just before dawn. Hutchins was devastated. He had sat vigil by her bedside for 3 days straight, watching helplessly as she slipped away despite Celia's attentions. Or perhaps, Thomas thought darkly, because of them. The change in Hutchins was immediate and profound. The lean, efficient overseer who had managed Waverley with iron discipline became a hollow shell. He still performed his duties, but mechanically, without the sharp attention to detail that had made him valuable. He began drinking heavily, starting with a glass of whiskey at noon and continuing throughout the afternoon until he was barely coherent by evening. Thomas tried to address it several times, but Hutchins would just stare at him with red-rimmed eyes and say, "She shouldn't have died, Mr. Pruitt. She was only 43, strong as an ox until she wasn't. Doesn't make sense." None of it makes sense. By February, Hutchins was useless as an overseer. Thomas had no choice but to promote Daniel, just as Celia had suggested. Daniel accepted the promotion with quiet dignity and proved surprisingly effective at managing the other workers. He was firm but fair, respected rather than feared, and production actually increased under his supervision. Celia's influence continued to grow. Women from neighboring plantations began appearing at Waverley, sometimes with their master's knowledge, sometimes without, seeking Celia's advice on matters ranging from difficult pregnancies to mysterious ailments that white doctors couldn't cure. Thomas found himself in the peculiar position of running what amounted to a medical practice, with Celia as the primary practitioner and himself merely the owner of the facility. The fees from these consultations were substantial. By March, Celia's medical work had brought in nearly $800, more than some field hands generated in an entire year. Thomas kept careful records, depositing the money in his account at the Planters Bank of Savannah, telling himself he was simply managing his plantation's resources efficiently. But he knew better. Every dollar earned from Celia's healing tied him more tightly to her, made her more indispensable, more protected. He was becoming complicit, not through action, but through acceptance, through the slow erosion of principles in favor of profit. In late March, something happened that forced Thomas to confront just how far he had fallen into Celia's web. A man arrived at Waverley one afternoon, riding an expensive horse and dressed in the fine clothes of Charleston's merchant class. His name was Robert Pemberton, and he was the nephew of the late Dr. Harold Pemberton, the man who had owned Celia before Thomas. Thomas received him in the main house parlor, offering bourbon and the careful courtesy that Southern hospitality demanded. But Pemberton waved away the drink and got straight to his purpose. "Mr. Pruitt, I understand you purchased a woman named Celia at auction last August. I want to buy her from you." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "Celia is not for sale. She's a valuable worker, essential to my plantation's operations." I'll pay 5 times what you paid, $60. Still no. Pemberton leaned forward, his expression hardening. Let me be direct. That woman murdered my uncle and 3 other men. I have no proof that would stand up in court, but I know it as surely as I know my own name. She's dangerous, Mr. Pruitt. Every day you keep her here, you're putting yourself and everyone on this plantation at risk. Those are serious accusations without evidence. Evidence. Pemberton laughed bitterly. My uncle died 3 months after that woman's daughter passed. His overseer, his driver, his personal physician, all dead within weeks of each other. You call that coincidence? I call it unfortunate timing. People die, Mr. Pemberton. It's the nature of life. Don't patronize me. I've done my research. I know about the outbreak here last October, how 23 people fell ill and she saved most of them. I know about the field hand who died of poisoning in December. I know about a girl named Ruth who threw herself down a well, or tried to, right before Christmas. And I know Hutchins's wife just died last month. Pemberton's voice dropped. See a pattern yet? Thomas felt cold spreading through his chest. When laid out like that, the deaths did form a pattern, but he kept his voice steady. Celia saved 21 people during that outbreak. She's delivered dozens of healthy babies. She's the best medical practitioner in Chatham County, and I'm not selling her to satisfy your vendetta against someone you blame for your uncle's death. You're a fool. Pemberton stood abruptly. My uncle was a fool too. He thought he could control her, could use her skills while ignoring the danger. He's dead now. His overseer is dead. Everyone close to him is dead. How long do you think before she decides you're next on her list? I appreciate your concern, but my answer is final. Celia stays at Waverly. Pemberton stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. When you end up like my uncle, don't say you weren't warned. That woman is a plague, Mr. Pruitt, and plagues don't stop until they've consumed everything in their path. After Pemberton left, Thomas stood on the portico, watching the man ride away. His hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the creeping realization that Pemberton was right. Thomas was in danger. He had known it since finding Celia's journals, since understanding what she was capable of. But hearing it confirmed by someone else made it real, in a way it hadn't been before. That evening Thomas did something he had been avoiding for months. He went through his plantation records systematically, documenting every death and illness since Celia's arrival. The pattern Pemberton had mentioned became even clearer when written down. Samuel, dead from poisoning in December, but Celia had been treating him days before for a minor injury. Ruth, driven to madness and death after confessing to Samuel's murder, with Celia present at her breakdown. Hutchins's wife, wasting disease that Celia treated for months, always keeping her alive just long enough to extract maximum suffering from Hutchins. And there were others Thomas hadn't considered. An elderly field hand who had died in his sleep in November. Natural causes, everyone said, but the man had been in perfect health the day before. A house servant who had fallen down the main house stairs in January, breaking her neck. An accident, surely, but the servant had complained to Thomas about Celia just days earlier, saying the herb woman frightened her. 5 deaths in 6 months, possibly more if Thomas expanded his search to include less obvious cases. But balanced against that were the 21 saved during the outbreak, the 37 successful births, the countless minor ailments treated and cured. Celia's ledger was working exactly as she had described. Lives saved, lives taken, the scales constantly balancing. The question Thomas couldn't answer was where he fell on those scales. Was he guilty in Celia's eyes? Had he done something, or failed to do something, that warranted a death sentence? He treated his slaves better than most masters, didn't he? He provided adequate food, shelter, medical care. He rarely used the whip. He didn't separate families unnecessarily. But he was still a master. He still owned human beings. He still profited from their forced labor. In Celia's philosophy of absolute justice, was that enough to condemn him? Thomas began taking precautions. He stopped eating food prepared by the house servants unless he watched it being made from start to finish. He locked his bedroom door at night and kept a loaded pistol on his bedside table. He avoided being alone with Celia whenever possible. He inspected everything she sent to the main house, tonics, herbs, teas, looking for signs of tampering, though he had no idea what those signs would look like. But he didn't send her away, didn't sell her, didn't restrict her movements, didn't even confront her about Pemberton's visit. Because doing so would be admitting he was afraid, and a master who showed fear to his slaves had already lost the battle for control. April brought warming weather and the beginning of planting season for the next cotton crop. The fields needed to be prepared, seeds sown, irrigation ditches cleared. It was demanding work that required every able body on the plantation, and Thomas threw himself into it with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Physical labor helped him avoid thinking about Celia, about the growing list of suspicious deaths, about the moral compromises he was making daily. But Celia wouldn't let him forget. On April 15th, Thomas woke to find something on his doorstep, a small cloth bundle tied with twine. Inside were dried herbs he didn't recognize and a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was Celia's. "For your health, master. Steep 1 spoonful in hot water each morning. It will ease the tension you carry and help you sleep better at night. Consider it a gift from someone who wishes you no harm, as long as you continue to deserve none." The message was clear. Celia knew about his precautions, his fears, his avoidance of her, and she was telling him, in her own way, that he was safe, for now. The conditional clause at the end was the real message. As long as you continue to deserve none. Thomas stared at the herbs for a long time. Was this a genuine offer of help? A medicinal tea that would actually ease his anxiety? Or was it a test, a way to see if he would trust her enough to consume something she had prepared? Or worse, was it the first step in a slow poisoning, something that would take months to kill him while appearing completely natural? He threw the herbs into the fireplace and watched them burn, the smoke carrying a bitter, acrid smell. That night, he slept with his pistol loaded and his door barred. But the gesture had achieved its purpose. Thomas was now constantly aware that Celia knew his routines, his fears, his weaknesses. She had access to his bedroom door. She could leave things for him to find. The message was unmistakable. If she wanted him dead, he would be dead. The fact that he was still alive meant she had chosen to let him live. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Thomas was the master in name only. Celia was the one who decided who lived and who died on Waverly Plantation. The situation deteriorated further in early May. Hutchins, who had been steadily drinking himself to death since his wife's passing, finally succeeded. Thomas found him in the old overseer's cabin, the same cabin where Celia had once lived, with an empty bottle of laudanum on the table beside him. The death was ruled a suicide. Grief and alcohol combining to destroy what little will to live Hutchins had retained. But Thomas noticed something odd. The laudanum bottle was one Celia had prepared months earlier for Hutchins's wife, to ease her pain during the final stages of her illness. How had Hutchins obtained it? Had he saved it from his wife's possessions? Or had someone given it to him, knowing what he would do with it? Thomas asked Daniel about it, carefully avoiding any direct accusation. Daniel's response was measured, thoughtful. "Mr. Hutchins was a troubled man these past months, sir. Couldn't forgive himself for things he'd done in his life. His wife's death broke something inside him. He was going to die one way or another, whether by drink or by his own hand. The laudanum just made it quicker and less painful." "Did Celia give it to him?" Daniel met his gaze steadily. "Does it matter, sir?" The man was already dead inside. His body just took a while to catch up. It was, Thomas realized, the same logic Celia used. Hutchins was guilty of something, his participation in Celia's whipping at Pemberton's plantation, and therefore deserved his fate. Whether he had taken his own life or been helped toward that end was irrelevant in the scales of justice. Thomas arranged a simple burial and promoted one of the field hands to fill Daniel's previous position. Life on Waverley continued, the routines of planting and maintenance proceeding as they always had. But beneath the surface, Thomas felt the ground shifting, eroding, threatening to collapse entirely. In mid-May, Thomas received an unexpected visitor, Josiah Crenshaw, the planter who had warned him about Celia nearly a year earlier. Crenshaw looked older, more worn, his face lined with worry. "Mr. Pruitt," Crenshaw said as they sat on the portico with bourbon neither man was drinking. "I owe you an apology. I should have been more forceful in my warning last year. Should have made you understand exactly what that woman is capable of." "I understand now," Thomas said quietly. "Do you? Do you understand that she's not just a murderer, but something far more dangerous? She's building a network, Mr. Pruitt, teaching other women her knowledge, spreading her philosophy of balance and justice. There are whispers all over Chatham County about women meeting in secret, sharing information about herbs and poisons, talking about debts and scales and retribution." Thomas felt ice in his veins. "How do you know this?" "Because it's happening on my plantation too. I have 3 women who spend time with Celia when she visits other properties. They've become different, bolder, more knowing. One of them looked me dead in the eye last week and said, 'The old ways are coming back, master. Best you remember that.' What am I supposed to do with that? Have you considered that maybe we deserve it?" The words were out before Thomas could stop them. "The old ways Celia talks about, the balance she's trying to achieve, maybe it's justice we've been avoiding for generations." Crenshaw stared at him in disbelief. "She's gotten to you. God help me, that woman has actually gotten inside your head. She saved 21 people during the outbreak, Crenshaw. She's delivered dozens of healthy babies. She's healed the sick when white doctors failed. Yes, people have died around her, but more have lived. Isn't that the definition of a net positive?" "A net positive?" Crenshaw stood abruptly. "Listen to yourself. You're rationalizing murder because the murderer is also useful. That's not justice, Mr. Pruitt. That's moral bankruptcy." He left without another word, and Thomas sat alone on the portico as evening fell, wondering when exactly he had crossed the line from reluctant acceptance to active defense of Celia's actions. When had he stopped seeing her as a threat and started seeing her as a necessary corrective to an unjust system? The answer, he realized with growing horror, was that he had been moving toward this position since the moment he found her journals. Every day he didn't act against her. Every death he rationalized away, every life she saved that he benefited from, all of it had been slowly eroding his moral foundation until he had become what Crenshaw accused him of being: complicit. June arrived with oppressive heat and humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. The cotton plants were growing well, but the weather also brought sickness, fever, dysentery, heat exhaustion. Celia worked tirelessly, moving from one patient to another, her herb garden now expanded to include dozens of medicinal plants. Thomas watched her work and saw, perhaps for the first time, the full complexity of what she was. She was a murderer, yes, but she was also a healer who genuinely cared about the people she treated. She was a philosopher with a coherent moral system, however terrible its implications. She was a teacher passing on knowledge that predated slavery and would outlast it. She was an agent of justice in a world that provided no legal recourse for people like her. And she was, Thomas finally admitted to himself, the most remarkable person he had ever met. The realization should have terrified him more than it did. On June 23rd, Celia came to the main house and requested to speak with Thomas privately. It was the first time she had initiated such a meeting since their confrontation in her cabin 6 months earlier. They sat in the study, the door closed, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Celia looked tired but composed, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm going to tell you something, Master, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded. "There's a man coming here tomorrow. His name is Benjamin Lowell. He owns a rice plantation on the Ogeechee River. You may remember him from the auction where you bought me. He was one of the men who refused to bid." Thomas did remember. Lowell had been talking with Crenshaw outside the auction house, discussing Celia's reputation. Lowell is coming here because his daughter is sick. She's 17, same age my Sarah was. The local doctor can't help her, and Lowell is desperate enough to overcome his fear of me. He's going to ask you to let me treat her. And will you? Celia's expression was unreadable. That depends. On what? On whether the scales demand it. You see, Benjamin Lowell was at Pemberton's plantation the day they whipped me. He wasn't directly involved, but he was there, visiting on business. He saw them tie me up in that barn. He saw my daughter dying in the house, and he said nothing. Did nothing, just looked away because it was easier than getting involved in another man's business. Thomas felt his chest tighten. So you're going to let his daughter die? I'm going to make him understand what it means to watch your child suffer while someone who could help chooses not to. I'm going to make him feel what I felt in that barn, knowing Sarah was dying and I couldn't reach her. Celia's voice remained calm, almost gentle. And then, after he's felt that pain, after he's begged and pleaded and promised anything if only I'll save her, then I'll decide. Maybe I'll heal her. Maybe I won't. The scales will tell me which is right. That's monstrous. Is it? Or is it just a mirror held up to show what's been done to us for generations? Lowell had the power to help and chose not to. Now I have the power, and I'm choosing the same way he did. If that's monstrous, then we're all monsters, Master. Every single one of us. Thomas had no response. The logic was circular, perfect, and absolutely horrifying. I'm telling you this, Celia continued, because tomorrow you're going to face a choice. Lowell will beg you to intervene, to order me to treat his daughter. You have that legal right. I'm your property and my skills belong to you. But if you give me that order, you become part of the chain. You become someone whose debt needs to be balanced. The threat was implicit but clear. If Thomas forced Celia to act against her judgment, he would move from the category of people she tolerated to the category of people she targeted. Why are you warning me? Because despite everything, I don't want to see you on the wrong side of the scales. You're not a good man, Master. You own slaves, and that makes you complicit in evil. But you're not a cruel man. You don't take pleasure in suffering. You genuinely believe you're treating us as well as the system allows. She paused. That's not enough to make you innocent, but it might be enough to keep you alive. She stood to leave, then turned back one final time. When Lowell comes tomorrow, remember this. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for your non-interference. There's a difference. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He paced his bedroom, pistol on the table, mind racing through scenarios. Could he stop Celia from enacting whatever revenge she had planned? Legally, yes, she was his property, and he could order her to do anything. Practically no. She had made herself indispensable, and moving against her would destabilize the entire plantation. More fundamentally, did he want to stop her? Lowell had stood by while Celia's daughter died. In any just universe, shouldn't he face consequences for that moral failure? The law wouldn't punish him. Looking away wasn't a crime. But Celia's alternative system of justice would. Was that wrong? Or was it the only form of accountability available in a world built on systemic injustice? Thomas was still wrestling with these questions when Benjamin Lowell arrived the next morning, his face haggard with worry and lack of sleep. Mr. Pruitt, I need your help. My daughter Catherine is desperately ill, and I've heard you have a slave woman with exceptional medical skills. I'm prepared to pay whatever you ask. But please, let her come examine Catherine. Thomas looked at the desperate father and saw, with terrible clarity, what Celia had seen a year ago in the barn at Pemberton's plantation. A man begging for help that might not come, helpless in the face of forces beyond his control. I'll send for Celia, Thomas said slowly, but I can't promise she'll agree to treat your daughter. She makes her own decisions about which patients to accept. But you're her master. You can order her. I can, but I won't. If you want her help, you'll have to ask her yourself, and you'll have to live with whatever decision she makes. When Celia arrived, Lowell's desperation overcame his pride. He actually knelt before her, tears streaming down his face. Please, she's only 17, she's done nothing wrong. Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'll give it. Just save my daughter." Celia looked down at him with an expression Thomas couldn't read. "Tell me, Mr. Lowell, do you remember visiting the Pemberton plantation last summer?" Lowell's face went pale. Yes. I was there on business." "Do you remember what you saw in the barn?" "Please. That has nothing to do with—" "Do you remember?" Celia's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Yes," Lowell whispered. "I remember. I saw them whipping you. I saw your daughter in the house, heard her crying. I wanted to say something, but it wasn't my place. It wasn't my business. You looked away. You chose the comfort of non-involvement over the difficulty of doing what was right. You let my daughter die without speaking a single word in our defense. I'm sorry. God help me, I'm sorry. I've thought about it every day since. I should have said something, should have done something. I was a coward, and your daughter paid the price for my cowardice." Lowell was sobbing now, broken. "I know I deserve whatever judgment you give me, but my daughter doesn't. She's innocent. Please don't make her pay for my sins." The room was absolutely silent. Thomas watched Celia's face, trying to read what she was thinking. This was the moment she had been building toward, the perfect mirror of her own trauma. She had the power to let Catherine Lowell die, to make Benjamin Lowell feel exactly what she had felt. The scales demanded it. Justice required it. But then Celia did something Thomas never expected. She helped Lowell to his feet. "Take me to your daughter. I'll examine her and do what I can." Lowell's expression transformed from despair to shocked hope. You'll help her? "I'm a healer, Mr. Lowell. That's what I do. But understand this, the debt isn't cancelled. You owe me a life now, and one day I will collect. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday the scales will balance. And when that time comes, you will pay what you owe." Lowell nodded frantically. "Yes, anything, I promise. Whatever you need." "What I need," Celia said quietly, "is for you to remember what it feels like to be helpless. Remember what it feels like to have your child's life in someone else's hands. Remember what it feels like to beg for mercy, and the next time you see someone else in that position, don't look away. That's the payment I'm asking for. Not money, not favors, just the willingness to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." She left with Lowell, leaving Thomas alone in the study, his understanding of Celia fundamentally altered once again. She wasn't simply taking revenge, she was teaching. Every death, every healing, every moment of calculated mercy or calculated cruelty, all of it was part of a larger lesson she was trying to impart. The scales didn't just balance death against death. They balanced action against inaction, cruelty against kindness, looking away against standing up. Celia returned 3 days later and reported that Catherine Lowell would recover. The girl had been suffering from infected lungs, made worse by the calomel and bloodletting the local doctor had prescribed. Celia had stopped the harmful treatments, cleaned out the infection with herbs and steam inhalation, and strengthened the girl's constitution with proper nutrition. "Will Lowell keep his promise?" Thomas asked. "He will, because he understands now what I was trying to teach him. Fear can change behavior, but understanding changes the heart. Lowell will be a different man from now on, better than he was. That's worth more than his death would have been. You could have let her die. The scales demanded it. The scales demanded something, yes. But I chose what that something would be. That's the power I have, Master. Not just to take life, but to shape it. To turn someone's worst moment into an opportunity for them to become better." She paused. "That's what my mother taught me. The old knowledge isn't just about poison and healing. It's about understanding human nature deeply enough to change it." Summer progressed. The cotton grew tall in the fields, and life at Waverly continued its rhythms. But everything had changed. Thomas saw it in the way the enslaved workers carried themselves, with more confidence, more dignity. He saw it in the way white planters approached Celia now, with respect that bordered on fear. He saw it in himself, in the way he had stopped thinking of himself as a master, and started thinking of himself as merely the legal owner of property he no longer truly controlled. The Civil War was coming. Everyone could feel it, the tension building between North and South like pressure before a storm. South Carolina would secede, other states would follow, and the entire system that Waverly and plantations like it depended on would collapse. Thomas found himself oddly at peace with that prospect. He had seen an alternative system in action through Celia, one based on knowledge, skill, and moral authority, rather than legal ownership and physical force. When slavery ended, and it would end, Celia and people like her would thrive because their power came from what they knew and what they could do, not from chains and bills of sale. In early September, as the cotton approached harvest time again, Thomas called Celia to his study one final time. "I've decided to manumit you," he said without preamble. "I'm going to file paperwork giving you your freedom." Celia's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because you're already free. You have been since the day I bought you. Maybe before that. The paperwork will just make it official. And what do you expect in return? Nothing. Stay at Waverly, leave, do whatever you want. I'm not placing conditions on this. There are always conditions, Master. Not this time. Consider it my attempt to balance my own scales. I participated in an evil system, profited from it, failed to oppose it when I should have. I can't undo that, but I can at least free one person who should never have been enslaved in the first place." Celia was silent for a long moment, studying him. Then slowly she smiled, and this time the warmth was genuine. "You've learned something, Master. Not everything I tried to teach you, but enough to survive what's coming." "What is coming?" "War, revolution, the end of everything you know. But you'll survive it, because you understand now that power isn't about ownership. It's about knowledge, skill, and the relationships you build with people who have reasons to keep you alive rather than dead." She stood to leave. "I'll stay at Waverly for now. These people need me and I'm not done teaching yet. But I'll stay as a free woman, not as your property. We'll see how that changes things." The manumission papers were filed in October, making Celia legally free under Georgia law. It caused talk throughout Chatham County. Why would a planter free such a valuable slave? But Thomas didn't explain himself to anyone. Celia continued her work, training more women in the healing arts, building her network of knowledge keepers, preparing for the day when the old system would fall and new systems would need to be built to replace it. Thomas continued managing Waverly, but with a different understanding of his role. He wasn't the master of the plantation. He was simply the person legally responsible for it, operating with the consent and cooperation of the people who actually did the work. When that consent was withdrawn, as it would be once slavery ended, his authority would evaporate like morning mist. The last entry in Thomas Pruitt's diary, dated December 31st, 1859, read, "I bought Celia for $12 and thought I had gotten a bargain. Instead, I acquired something far more valuable and far more dangerous than I could have imagined. A teacher who showed me the difference between legal authority and moral power, between ownership and control, between what the law permits and what conscience demands. I don't know if the lessons she taught me make me better or worse, innocent or complicit, saved or damned. But I know I'm different than I was a year ago, and the world is different too. We're all standing on the edge of something vast and terrible, a reckoning that's been building for generations. When it comes, I suspect people like Celia, the ones who've been keeping the old knowledge alive in secret, waiting for their moment, will be the ones who survive and perhaps even thrive. As for me, I can only hope that when the scales finally balance, I've done enough to tip them toward mercy rather than justice. This mystery shows us that sometimes the most terrifying power isn't violence or supernatural forces, but human knowledge wielded by someone with both the skill to heal and the will to judge. The story of Celia and Thomas Pruitt reminds us that every system built on injustice carries within it the seeds of its own destruction, and that those seeds are often cultivated by the very people the system sought to control. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Do you think Thomas made the right choices? Could the deaths at Pemberton's plantation really have been natural, or was Celia responsible? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next video.